great father. You know that stories you've heard of people who talk about, if you were daddy's girl and you had a great father in your life, a great present dad, you are most likely to attract a similar partner, a man who honors you, who respects you, who does everything for you, who provides, who protects, a dream of a man. And yet that's not true. I mean, it wasn't true for my mom, and it's not true for a lot of people. I mean, I coach a lot of women, and this is always a tricky one for them. Like, yeah, but I had such an amazing father, and the narrative goes that if you've had a great dad, you will attract a great partner. And yet I keep attracting men who cheat on me, men who are narcissists, men who are not the kind of dad my dad was. And so I'm very confused. What is the story here? And yeah, obviously, rightfully so, you'd wonder because this is the story we are told, great dad, great partner, and yet in reality, it plays out quite differently. Not all the time. I mean, sometimes you do find that, I had a great father, and therefore my husband is like my father in many, many ways. And I met someone who is like my dad, and that's great. But in some cases, maybe even most cases, it's not that. It doesn't play out that way. So what exactly is going on here? What is the story? I look at it in two ways. So two things could be happening in a scenario like that where you had a wonderful father, but your relationship dynamic, you keep attracting very strange men or almost the opposite of your dad. So scenario one is that men, the main men in our lives, which is our dads, right? Or a father figure, they are sort of like how the mother is the main woman in our lives, our first love. So your dad is obviously your first male or the first man that you truly loved. And if it was a great father, he was a great father, but you find that behind the scenes, behind closed doors, to your mother, he was not a great husband. I mean, I've heard stories that heartbreaking where you find that the father was cold towards your mom. The father was a serial cheater. There was stories of mistresses that you would have not known about as a little girl. You find or you hear stories of secret families where your father might have been a great dad, but he was a disaster of a husband. You find that your father was narcissistic or your father was a bully or your father was abusive in some ways to your mother. And therefore, when you start getting into relationships, guess who you become? When you are in a relationship, you become the woman. And when you are the woman, you are going to enact what the things your mother experienced, so it touches way back into the mother wound. So you then enact and you sort of become your mother, and then you attract what your mother attracts, which is a not so great partner, not so great husband with all the dynamics that a not so great husband comes with. And you'll find that you would have picked up the things that your mom dealt with. So if the husband was a cheating guy, you'd find that you draw to yourself cheating men. If he was emotionally abusive, that's what you draw. If he was even physically abusive, that's sort of what you draw to yourself. And all sorts of other underlying layers that your mom may have experienced as a wife or as a girlfriend or as a partner to your father. So that is scenario one. That how come he was a great dad, but I'm not meeting great men as the narrative goes. So that's scenario one. Scenario two is even deeper. It could be that it is a karmic dynamic. It's a karma. You had a great dad, and maybe he wasn't so horrible. This time, the dad was not horrible to your mother. The dad was a great dad and a great husband and a great partner and a great man. And yet you find yourself drawing men that are less than, that are not like your dad, almost the opposite. So what is happening in that scenario is that it might just be a karmic relationship, which ties into soul contracts, not soul ties. That's a different thing. Soul contracts. And soul contracts talk to what is it that you are here to do on earth? Most people who are healers, like me, healers and teachers, or people who are light workers, tend to draw to themselves people needing healing. So I mean, in one of the videos, I do share that I come from a long line of teachers and healers. My mom might have not owned the fact that she's a healer, but my mom was a healer. My grandmother was a healer. and her mother was a healer, and some of my aunts. And so what you find then is that we get into a space where our relationships with men are karma related, meaning are karma or even dharma related. Dharma is your life's work, where you draw to yourself people needing healing. And the same way that the people who come to me needing coaching, needing healing, needing teaching, need that. The partner also would come into your life needing that. So you play a role of a healer, which is why then you would draw to yourself someone who is almost the opposite of your father. Because you don't need a father. You've already had that. You've had a great dad who's really fathered you and nurtured you and been good to your mom as well. And yet you are drawing this guy who is, huh? Usually as a healer, that would be the kind of guy that you draw into. And you find that you are in spaces where your relationships are like that. You are not meeting men who are like your dad. You've already had that. It's because you don't need that. You don't need that. You're a healer, and people will come to you needing healing. So you are playing that healer's oath role, or you and the partner have a soul contract that when you one day meet here on earth, this is what you will give to each other. He'll come needing some type of healing, and you will be the conduit for it. You will be the provider of such things. And I think that's what happened to my mom with my dad, because you'll remember in that video, I said, I was reading that, they say women marry their dads and men marry their moms. And yet in this case, my mom did not marry her father. Instead, it was my dad who married his mom, because my mom was very much like her mother-in-law. And I think the role that my mother was playing in daddy's life was that of a nurturer and a healer, which is why I feel like, because my mom passed away first, when my mom passed away in September of 2017, on the 3rd of September, my dad passed away January 10 of 2018. So hardly, not even 6 months later, my dad passed away. That's how you know that it was a karmic relationship. It was a soul contract type of relationship at a deep spiritual level. At a social, psychological level, we might say they were codependent, but at a deep, deep spiritual level, you find that there was something even deeper happening there, very karmic relationship, very soul contractee relationship going on there. So those are my two theories. Theory one is that your father might have been a great father, great daddy, you were daddy's girl, but he was really, really not a great husband to your mom in all sorts of ways that you can think of. So when you then enter a relationship, you then play the role that your mom played. You are repeating your mother's pattern in this instance, as opposed to you as a child. As a child, you were a child, so you needed a dad and you got a dad. But as a woman, you are repeating your mother's pattern. How do you then heal that? Maybe topic for another video, because I don't really want this to be long. And then with the healer's oath one, you request, how do you heal that? A lot of work, a lot of inner work needs to happen, which is topic for another video. But sometimes, and not sometimes, which in most cases, this is why healers, especially the older we grow, the more matured we become, the need for a relationship or the need for a marriage, even the need for a full-time partnership with a man does not necessarily dominate our lives. You know that men come into your life for a particular reason, particular season. And those who end up becoming a life partner in a form of a husband are usually on the same mission as you. And in that case, you've transcended that healer's oath or that soul contract, it's fulfilled. And then you can move on to other aspects of your relationship ping world. Think of the healers that you know who are famous, Bo Maya Angelou, Bo Ian Levanzan. Locally, think of Miriam Makeba. She was a great, great healer. I also want to say Mama Winnie Mandela. I also want to say that, but maybe not. I don't know. Let me just leave it there. Let me leave it for interpretation. But think about the women who were great, who healed the nation. Okay, so those are just some things to think about around that issue of, if my dad was a great dad, why am I attracting a crappy guy? yeah, those are the two theories. There's probably more, but those are my two theories. I hope this was helpful. And as usual, this is my story. I cannot wait to hear yours. See you next week.